Good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm Penelope Curtis. I'm the Director of Tate Britain, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here this evening, and thank you for coming. Just before I do my introduction, I would like to remind you, please turn off your mobile phones if you haven't done so already. I'd just like to alert you to the fact that the occasion is being filmed and recorded, and I think that's all the housekeeping notes I need to make now. But this is one of a series of BP British Art Lectures. I think it's the 7th in the series. And strangely enough, it's the first one by an artist. So all the other ones have been by different people from different walks of life in the arts, but not visual artists. When I arrived here in April, I was asked, not long after my arrival, who I would like to propose for this lecture. And as I had just heard Yinka Shonibare speak at a panel discussion that we had here, after his fourth plinth piece was inaugurated in Trafalgar Square, I proposed him because I thought he'd made such a good contribution that evening. The panel discussion that he was part of in May was called Message in a Bottle, appropriately enough, given Trafalgar Square, debating multiculturalism and the arts. And multiculturalism is a topic, a word that we hear a lot of, and it can become very hackneyed, and one tends to hear the same kind of things about multiculturalism. And what interested me about what Yinka was saying was that it wasn't at all what I had anticipated. It isn't what one anticipates. He always comes at the question from an oblique point of view, gives an illuminating answer, and he really makes us rethink the terms that we've become rather overused to. So I'm so really very delighted that Yinka has said yes to our invitation tonight. And he's going to be talking with Gilda Williams, who will engage him in a kind of conversation for half an hour or so, and then it'll be your turn to pose questions for Yinka or Gilda. So I hope we'll have a real conversation about multiculturalism, or whatever we want to call it, and whatever Yinka wants to talk about, we'll see. I know that a phrase which has been used about Yinka's work, maybe by you yourself, is the idea of the post-colonial hybrid. And I think that in terms of Yinka's work, which I'm sure you all know, and that's why you're here, we've really become quite used to using his work almost as a kind of shorthand for thinking of that hybridity. He's really given us that kind of visual language for thinking about what that means. What is post-colonialism? What is the hybrid? Yinka himself was born in London but grew up in Nigeria and then came back to London to study. So he is very much that combination of post-colonialism. So I think, without further ado, I would like to thank both our speakers, both Yinka for saying yes and Gilda for agreeing to do something that's quite tough, which is to sit on a stage and try and interview someone or engage them in a conversation, which I know from experience can be fun and can be challenging. And thank you very much for coming. And as I say, within half an hour or so, this debate will be opened up to you, so please think about how you might contribute. Many thanks.
Are we going to begin by rolling a few moments of Yinka Shonibare's work, Odile and Odette? those of you who are not familiar with Yinka Shonibare's work, I'm sure very few of you are, that Odile and Odette being, of course, a take on the Tchaikovsky ballet Swan Lake, in which there are these two figures, usually one played by the same person ordinarily, the good and the bad, who are here mirror imaged in dance before us. And like a lot of Yinka's work, it is beautiful, it is sensual, it is unpredictable. It somehow combines something you're familiar with a moment or an idea, an image in culture which is completely unfamiliar. If I may just have a 5-minute introduction overview of Yinka Shonibare's work before we begin our conversation. Yinka, I'm so honored to be here. Yinka Shonibare is easily one of the best known, most important artists working in Britain today. Certainly has had innumerable recognitions, permanent works at the Tate, works at the seen at the MoMA, New York, the Metropolitan, Documenta, the Venice Biennale, was nominated for the Turner Prize, has won the Citibank Photography Award, the Paul Hamlin Award. It's been shown at the National Gallery among very few contemporary artists. I could go on, and of course was awarded the MBE in 2005. Earlier this year, of course, he won the 4th Plinth Commission, which is, as I'm sure many of you have seen, HMS Victory is the title. It is Nelson's ship in a bottle. And like many works, like all of Yinka Shonibare's work, it's exuberant, it's unexpected, and it's a mix of sources and histories combined in some kind of rather magical, unexpected object, which is, of course, has the sails in Dutch wax fabric, which is the fabric you see here and you saw on the ballerinas. This very complicated, colorful fabric that sort of screams Africanness, dare I say it, but which, as Yinka has researched, was designed in Indonesia, manufactured in Manchester and elsewhere, and then re-imported from Africa as part of its own identity. And then we'll talk specifically about that. As Penelope said, Yinka was born in London, then returned to Nigeria. His family returned to Nigeria when he was 3, and then Yinka Shonibare returned to London at the age of 17, I believe, to study art at Byam College, now part of the Central St. Martin's, and later at Goldsmiths. He works across many media, painting, installation, sculpture, photography, filmmaking. Perhaps best known or most widely seen for these very richly patterned paintings, which replicate moments of the patterns in the Dutch wax fabric, and installations, the tableau vivant sculptures, handily here is one in front of me, of these headless, symbolically headless, guillotined perhaps, figures from history in various poses from history and painting, again dressed in Dutch wax fabric. Most recently, Yinka Shonibare has opened about 2 years ago, I believe, the guest projects space in the East End below his studio, where anyone is allowed to submit proposals for curated exhibitions, and it's sort of an open alternative art space, which I don't think shows your work, or rarely shows your work, but is about opening up a sort of curatorial exhibition opportunity to everyone. So certainly working on all levels of the art world, from sort of MoMA, Tate, to very experimental new art. So with that, by way of introduction, I thought, Yinka, I might start at the end, actually, and ask you about success. I mean, you're extraordinarily successful in many ways, and I wonder what, for you, have been your most successful work, or recognition that for you was meaningful, or what successfulness has been in your life and work.
Well, I mean, I think I should start by talking about the 4th Plinth, because for me, I was actually really, well, I think it's the first time I've been, any proposal has made me like really nervous, you know, because I so wanted to get that project. Just because it's Trafalgar Square, you know, because I remember when I was a child in Nigeria, we used to come to London you know, for the summer holidays. And I remember having my pictures taken with all the pigeons there with my parents. Trafalgar Square was full of pigeons at that time. So on a kind of nostalgic level or something, you know, and also, you know, in Nigeria, it was a source of pride to have your photograph taken at Trafalgar Square and then show it to your friends. And you know, I've been in London. And, you know, so I think really I wanted, just because, you know, I think I heard at least over 1,000 people pass by Trafalgar Square an hour, you know, so that's a lot of people. So the opportunity to actually show my work to the wider public as opposed to people having to go into museums, I found very exciting. So for me, that's kind of success in a way, you know, to have access to such a large audience. Yeah.
And you've talked about the importance of visibility and how you have created opportunities of visibility. How is that related to your whole idea about, you've talked about your expectations of black art, expectations of outsider art, and how do you sort of contradict that and create opportunities for people to see your work and understand your work in its ambiguous?
Well, I guess what you're talking about when you mention black art is the issue of context and the issue of history. What a lot of people don't realize now is that, you know, they go to galleries and they see women artists, you know, they see Cynthia Sherman, they see Barbara Kruger. They think it's always been like that, you know. They see, you know, Chris O'Feely, Steve McQueen. When I was at art school, there was, you know, I have to say that there was a lot of discrimination, and it was very difficult for artists of African origin to show with galleries. And of course, you know, a lot of artists of African origin were not very happy about this. So there was a lot of kind of protest art, or people, you know, protesting about that. And the black art movement was actually formed by an artist called Keith Piper and Eddie Chambers. And they raised a lot of the issues about just this absence from the mainstream and this lack of opportunity. And I'd heard also at the time, a number of private galleries felt that they could not sell the work, or it would be difficult for them to sell the work. So, and at the time, you know, I was a student looking around, you know, trying to find role models. You know, there was a show at the Haywood Gallery at the time called The Other Story. And that show was put on by an artist from Pakistan called Rashid Areen. He runs a magazine now called Third Text, and the magazine looks at the work of artists, you know, non-European artists. But, you know, it's very important to talk about this, because I think that a lot of people don't appreciate that actually there were activists and people who had to fight for the kind of success I now enjoy. So it was not that easy to you know, just for the public generally to accept the work of non-European artists. But you know, I'm glad we are where we are now. You know, I'm not entirely sure if we're totally there yet. You know, because I can still count, you know, the number of artists of African origin who have access to mainstream art. But then, you know, one thing that art does is that, for me anyway, art is not a purely aesthetic thing. You know, art is, I like the magic of art, but also it is also a way to explore a number of political issues. And I think that, you know, also theory does come into this, because when I was at art school, people were really looking at representation and somehow trying to deconstruct representation. And at that time, we were all kind of reading Derrida and Baudrillard, so that was the conversation at the time. And also the conversation was about, changing accepted, you don't really simply just have to sit back and accept that, that's the way things are. You actually challenge the institution and you challenge fixed notions about things. And I think that, so in my work, rather than the work being about, about politics, it's really about the politics of representation itself. So that then, really my work began when I was at art school. I was very interested in basically the political context, what was going on. And at that time in Russia, there was perestroika. And I was really thinking that perestroika is what happened in Russia when the Cold War was coming to an end and things were starting to change in Russia. And I wondered what would actually happen after the Cold War. What would the world look like? So I did a series of artworks exploring that. And then one of my tutors came to, saw the work, and then he said, well, you are of African origin, aren't you? I said, yes. He said, well, why aren't you producing authentic African art? I'm like, authentic African art? So what is authentic African art? And then, of course, I also started to think, well, no one would ever say to my British colleagues, why don't you make work about Morris dancing? That would be absurd. So anyway, and then I thought, well, of course, people do see me, people have a certain idea of who I am, and I realized that actually, it was in fact a question of damned if you do and damned if you don't. So if I wasn't in fact making work about my African origins, or blackness for that matter, people will just say, well, is the black guy who doesn't make work about being black. So basically, so those issues, I realized that actually, there is a perception of who you are through your sort of identity. But then I didn't want to produce work that would come across as kind of defensive in any way, because, I was trained as an artist, and I love color. I like the pleasure of art. I like to kind of seduce. I also like to provoke with the work. So in a sense, I guess that's what I then, went on to do as I developed the work.
There's a great moment in an interview where you went to find out what African art was. You went to the British Museum
yes.
to discover indeed what that was meant to be.
Yeah,
but I think what's interesting, though, is that there was, speaking of people like Keith Piper, there was a sense of seriousness and humorlessness and colorlessness, dare I say it, which is certainly an idea of outsider art or other political kinds of art that is dispelled in your work very emphatically. Was that was a strategy that you obviously...
Well, quite rightly so. A lot of the work that was kind of protest art and challenging, as I'm, at the beginning of my conversation, I mentioned Barbara Kruger, I mentioned Cindy Sherman. All those artists are sort of mainstream, women artists. But of course, before those artists, there were people like Judy Chicago, and there were artists who were really protesting. There was a civil rights movement, So in a sense, the protest work, I found, even though the work kind of created visibility for people like me, those works could not really be widely accessible because they were quite, tough works, and quite rightly so. But I felt, in a sense, that I didn't want to be deprived of the enjoyment of pleasure with my art. And I felt very much that, pleasure and the aesthetic should not be the monopoly of any group. I have a right to be humorous in my work if I want to be. I don't have to carry the burden of, of the past. I mean, of course, the past is absolutely relevant because I do look at the past, but I also look at the past to look forward. So in a sense, in the context of that work, which indeed was serious because it had to be serious, I wanted to move the debate onto another level. Yeah.
I'm interested in, you've said about frivolity, having images of about survival, this work, but there's the swing and people being entertained and pursuing leisure activities, and working with frivolity as a political stance and as perhaps the least expected thing that one might expect you to do. Does that determine how you choose subject matter, how you proceed with your art?
Well, I think that being successful or being economically viable as an artist, I've always regarded as a political statement. So in other words, I think that when I've lived in Nigeria and I've also lived in London, and I've seen, even within Nigeria, I've seen the kind of vast issue of class and the kind of difference between various classes, and also being in England, you just have to, if you think about the foundation of the various institutions in this country, from the Lloyd's Bank to even Tate Gallery. There were people who had to work as slaves to actually create that wealth. That wealth has not always been there. And so I'm fascinated by excess on the one hand. And this also brings me to the issue of desire and questions about complicity as well. So on the one hand, the wealth that is actually created, I very much would like some of that for myself. Thank you very much. I do not see that I should be the kind of subservient one who doesn't have anything. But equally, I also, this is very much a dilemma in my head that, I do want very much to challenge the establishment. But gosh, I do want to be part of it as well. I want to be in. I don't really want to be out, but I also want to be in fighting. So, and there's that issue of ambivalence. So I don't really see myself as an outsider trying to fight because I don't really want to be outside. I want to be inside, but I want to scream while I'm inside. So I guess I want to have my cake and eat it too.
Well, how I would see it is that it's a refusal to be a victim. I mean, there really is no victimization in your work. You're a pleasure seeker. The figures in your work are pleasure seekers. I mean,
pleasure seeker. In what way do you mean that?
Well, in the Diary of the Victorian Dandy, you are seen having a great time, a very great time, and the figures in your work, by and large, they're having a great time. They're rarely seen working. I think there's a real pursuit of pleasure, and there's no victimization. Or
no, absolutely. I mean, the people I really like. I love Oscar Wilde. I love to read Oscar Wilde. I like the life of the estate, and of course, in my younger years, I had this kind of dandy persona. And I did a series of works about that, Diary of a Victorian Dandy. So, yes, I mean, in a way, I think that I'm entitled, but that work of me turning to pleasure or dandyism or the aesthetic has to be seen in the context of the radicalism of the civil rights movement. And then, what came, because there was the kind of, even before that, there was the sort of Harlem Renaissance, in the United States. And, and then, the civil rights movement and the kind of radicalism of all that. And of course, when I was at school, books also, played quite a significant role as a student, because I was reading people like Franz Fanon, Black Skin, White Mask. I was reading, and Fanon was very kind of radical. So a lot of the kind of really aggressive, radical kind of politics of the 70s, and sort of, because I was born in 62, and of course we know what happened in 68, and the kind of 68 generation, in a way, kind of opened things for people like me. Do you know what I mean? So, I wasn't old enough to kind of know exactly what was going on, but I was kind of, obviously aware enough. And of course, there was the whole, the whole kind of issue of, Nelson Mandela, the whole, because, we kind of grew up with all that. And so wanting to, in a way, what my generation or what I felt I was doing was to kind of free myself from the burden of this kind of weight of history. To even though, it does exist in my work, but it exists in my work not in the same kind of direct way, I still, I'm not this sort of big anti-capitalism. I love capitalism, I don't, I want to be rich, you know what I mean? So I'm not this, and I'm not embarrassed about that, because for me, having control of the means of production is, it's kind of radical politics, so, so for me, like, Louis Vuitton is not just Louis Vuitton. Louis Vuitton is actually getting hold of something that's not supposed to be mine. Do you know what I mean? So,
but
it's a form of radical theft.
But also, where you've said you never want your audience to know what to expect from you and the predictable. So you're, for example, embracing or accepting the art market is the kind of position one might be surprised to find a political artist or an outsider or an artist who's not always been invited into the sort of establishment of art to take. Is it like your art presenting a sort of unexpected context and idea behind it?
No, I think, in a way there's something it's kind of slightly dodgy about that, really, because are you saying I'm not good enough for those things?
No. I'm saying there's an expectation that you wouldn't accept the MBE, or you wouldn't want, and you refuse all those kinds of conventional ideas of remaining on some other place.
The thing is, as I said earlier about the kind of ambivalence here, because I remember when I received the letter about the MBE, it was like, I looked at it. First I thought, oh, wow, a letter from Tony Blair to me. That's nice, that's exciting. And then, oh, I have to go to the palace. And, on the one hand, there's the kind of right-on cool side of me thinking, oh, the coolest people have turned it down. You should just turn it down. And then I thought, who will care if I turned it down? Like, so many people, no one would really care if I turned it down. So I thought, all right, look, what I'll do is I will actually accept it, and it'll be a kind of performance, and it will be, but I will then use it in a vulgar and most un-English, ostentatious way. And so that's what I've then proceeded to do with the MBE. So I always have it on every time.
The cake and have it too again.
Yes, well, absolutely. And most vulgar indeed.
I'm interested because you were mentioning history, and you mentioned moments in history, the Civil Rights Movement, the Harlem Renaissance, and these are certainly not the moments in history that are referenced in your work, which go to the Enlightenment and Fragonard and Gainsborough and sort of moments in history that one would not associate with those kinds of... Why that selection? Why that period in history? the 18th into the 19th century? What is it that...
Well, I think the Western Enlightenment project is the biggest sort of fallacy against Africa. You know, I mean, it's a way to say that, you know, you guys didn't have your own philosophies beforehand, before we came. You know, we're here to civilize you guys because, you know, you didn't have your own culture beforehand. We discovered you. It's still happening now. You know, we're going to give you guys democracy because you're too stupid. You didn't have your own. And so, in a way, what I do is I'm really fascinated by empire and the notion of empire generally, and the fact that actually, you know, empire is not a static thing. It does shift from one culture to another. But of course, particularly the Western Enlightenment project has been used very much, you know, along with religion as well, as a way to render other cultures less significant, you know. And so that's, in a sense, why those references, and also my use of Victoriana in my work actually started almost like as a kind of joke, really, because in the 80s, Margaret Thatcher was talking about Victorian values. And Victorian values, for me, were particularly scary and repressive. And I felt that actually, you know, you must, in a sense, confront the thing that you're actually frightened of. You should actually take it on, and it becomes less frightening. And so, in a way, but also there's a mixture of admiration as well, because some of the iconic artworks that I parody, I actually love them too. You know, I mean, I love Gainsborough, I love Hogarth. You know.
Do you love Fragonard?
I love Fragonard. Yeah, it's really kitsch, but I love it. You know, so actually, it's not as easy as saying that I'm on the other side and I hate those things. You know, it's actually through admiration.
Right.
You know, the more I admire something, the more I want to kind of parody it. You know, so it's coming from a genuine, you know, admiration.
But there's also, I think, in addition to an absence of victimization, which is admirable, there's no anger in your work. I mean, it is an angry work. It's pleasurable work. And there's something you've said that there are no real good guys and bad guys in your work. Even the Victorians who you had seen as being as bad as history might have positioned any kind of empire, you were actually interested in understanding them and maybe, you know, diffusing that idea about their badness.
Well, also, you know, the issue of anger. I mean, quite honestly, would you be angry if you had a great middle-class education with... There's nothing to be angry about. You know, I've never really, in terms of my, you know, I'm from a middle-class Nigerian background. I had chauffeurs and cooks when I was young. I came to England with my parents' house in Battersea. You know, there's absolutely nothing to be angry about. So I would be a hypocrite if I... You know, but I was rather surprised when I came to the UK and I learned that if you were black, you were somehow meant to be inferior in some way, or there was some kind of issue. And I thought, well, that's not really my problem, you know. You know, so it would have been hypocritical for me to be, you know, faking some kind of anger, you know, when I have money in the bank and I'm okay. You know, so there's nothing to be angry about, really. I want to do art, but I'm not oblivious to the political issues. You know, I totally understand them, despite, you know, my background. You know, I absolutely understand how the perception, you know, how I'm perceived by people. And so, in a way, I'm actually playing a game with people's perception of who I'm actually meant to be. You know, but I'm actually amused rather than, you know, rather than being angry. Yeah.
If we could talk a little more about the work itself.
Yeah.
Because what the pleasure of, for example, seeing the tableau vivant has to do with the exquisiteness of the craftsmanship and the precision of the positions in which the figures are. Is that very important to you, the making and the sort of, the precision of the way with which they're made and the way we sort of can enjoy them materially?
Well, I mean, I think that any kind of art form that you're doing, professionalism is extremely important. And I pay attention to form, because form is very much part of the art, and form is an extension of content. I mean, there is no separation between form and content. So, if the content is focused, then the form does need to follow. The form expresses content, Because I trained as a painter. All I ever did was painting, and then I kind of expanded into other areas. But when I left Goldsmiths, I had a period of actually working. I had a short period. I was working as an arts development officer, kind of doing community arts education. But my office was at Battersea Arts Centre, and I used to see a lot of theatre then. Just hanging around a lot of kind of theatre people, and then that may also have fed into this kind of theatrical aspect of my work, And I love to kind of just go to the opera house and look at I just look at the kind of sets and stuff, So there's an obsession with the theatrical, but also not just on a purely formal level, but on a on a kind of political level in terms of disguise. With Carnival, for example, in the Caribbean, at the time of slavery, the slaves would actually, they would have a day in which, or several days, in which they could then dress up as the masters, and the masters could dress up as slaves. So within the kind of carnivalesque, you can actually become whatever you want to become, which is actually beyond what the real world would allow you to become. So that, for me, that's actually the that aspect of kind of the theatrical that I like, is that in art, or in that fakeness, the artificiality, you can transcend the mundaneness of the challenges of your everyday life. And I think that's something originally and politically that Carnival was actually coming from, this idea that the individual can be free to become whoever they would like to be. So therefore, that's why politically, actually, dressing up is not just about dressing up. It's also about taking yourself into a different realm that you perhaps may not be able to. So that aspect of masking or masquerade.
But it's interesting because, of course, most of your figures are in fact headless. They've been guillotined. Yeah. So we don't know if they are black, if they are white, if they are the original figure, or if they are a masqueraded figure. Yeah. What is that ambiguity about?
Well, I mean, identity? That kind of started as a joke about the French Revolution, really, when the aristocracy had their heads chopped off. And also, I didn't really want to racialize the figures. I didn't want them to be easily categorized, So they are of mixed race. If you look at the skin colors of the figures, and so of course we know that a lot of bad stuff comes out of stereotyping people. So, and at the time that really I left college, I mean, I looked around me and there was not a single artist of African origin working with any kind of private galleries at that time.
Really?
No, nobody.
This is early 90s?
Well, I left Goldsmiths in 1991, and there was no one, zero.
Wow. No
one. And we're talking 1991.
That's not that long ago.
1991 is not that long ago, And now we just, it's good that we've accepted it. We've accepted it as normal now, But you can imagine as a student looking around, and how kind of difficult in a way that was, because and so as a result, actually, a lot of my role models were mostly the feminist artists, because I saw that they did something that I was hoping I would be able to do, that they challenged the system. People like Nancy Sparrow, I was really into when I was a student, and I saw something there that actually, a lot of this, mostly American women artists, you know, how they kind of fought their way and they got these shows and they, you know, pushed on regardless. You know.
Was it work American artists you saw here, or was it through?
Well, I mean, I guess we all read art magazines, and you know, I read about some of them. And when I was in the United States, I saw some of the works.
Right.
And I also knew that a lot of them actually struggled to get, you know, to get where they were. So I thought, you know, that could be possible for me too.
And what about the sort of expanded art world, the massive, the much larger attention that art gains now with respect to the early 90s, the increased sort of market presence and so forth? Has that been good for art? I mean, has that been good for your art making, do you think, that kind of increased attention and perhaps resources and so forth? Has that been beneficial?
No, I mean, I have to say, you know, maybe the opportunities now for me came out of the expanded economy. I don't know what, you know, what's responsible for that, but the economy is much bigger now, and there is actually, you know, you can have a proper profession, because actually my parents were so shocked when I announced that I wanted to do art, because my father was a lawyer with his own law practice, and he had thought that I would go to school and study law. And when I said I wanted to be an artist, you know, it was tantamount to saying I wanted to be a tramp. You know, but then, you know, he started to see that, you know, it could be a viable profession. You know, he just wanted me to be all right, you know, to be able to look after myself and so on. So the expanded economy, I think, has certainly been a help very much, because obviously I know several artists who now make a living completely from being artists. Again, that was not entirely possible about 20 years ago. I mean, there were, you know, a handful of artists who were actually making money from their work, and they were like, you know, Barry Flanagan and David Hockney.
Right.
You know, so, but it's an expanded field now. And so, I mean, I guess it's a good thing.
One thing I think is interesting is how often the idea of the model comes up in your work. I mean, you have these models in art, which American feminists, but also in the work,
When you say them,
the models from film, the Dorian Gray, the models from painting. Is that useful for you as a way of working, to take models and rethink them?
Well, I think I view my work as a conversation with my audience. So what I tend to do is I tend to start that conversation, I will tend to use iconic things that are kind of very well known by people. So that's a kind of, you know, because if you're going to make a joke, you know, if somebody is not aware of the background, there's nothing to laugh at. Do you know what I mean? So you got to be starting from a point that people can have a way in, and then you can do a twist on that. You know, so in a way, and I also like to go for the most kind of traditional things, and then, you know, push it further. You know, so there is a deliberate reason why I tend to go for the iconic, and then play with those.
But there's also a sense of, look, this is the work that was in the National Gallery, of where the work belongs in terms of traditional museum categories. So you're an artist, so you belong in an art museum, but you perhaps one might have thought it belonged in an ethnographic museum decades ago, or perhaps in a historic museum, the kind of museum where there's, you know, roped off historic areas and those figures who are meant to. Was that of interest to you, blurring those kind of categories within the institutions themselves?
Well, I mean, as you know, in art history, and also in the whole kind of, you know, the whole idea of institutional debate or shaping, you know, it's also something that's a discourse within contemporary art. You know, what's the relationship to the institution, and how can you make interventions within the institution? And actually, is there really an outside of the institution? You know, does such a thing exist, or is it a fallacy? And if it does exist, how do you make, you know, proper intervention? So a lot of, you know, sometimes I do show works in, within actually established collections, and I insert my works. That's also another side of my practice. So I'm constantly looking at my own relationship to the institution. And, am I challenging the institution, or is there kind of complicity with the institution? I wouldn't say that I'm entirely clear about that even now myself. But it's an interesting relationship because I don't necessarily want to be outside of the institution.
But is that perhaps where your own space, alternative exhibiting space, comes in, to kind of keep a foot in that outside of the institution kind of space?
Well, yes. I mean, that's an interesting, because my own space is actually an extension of my own practice, in the sense that although I do not show in that space, but my studio is upstairs, and what I do is people put in proposals. There's a proposal box outside, and the best projects get 2 months free. And I only have one, I have a board, but they change every year, but the idea is and the space is kind of rough, it's raw, and the idea there is to always have a relationship with artists that are not fully institutionalized yet, or they're kind of doing challenging works. Because I guess the idea is that to provide a platform where you can actually fail, it's all right to fail. So in that space, if you're going to do something for the Tate, for example, you're not necessarily allowed to fail, because Tate will invite you because, you have to do the perfect thing. Whereas in that space, failure is actually allowed. And I think that's a way to continue a conversation, I think for me, process is a very important thing in art, because now we have the market, and the market doesn't necessarily understand process. The market understands product, and I don't want to kind of lose my soul completely, even though even though I enjoy the market, but I don't want to, so I guess that side gives me some kind of access to process.
But does an artist in a position like yours, who's got a lot of recognition and opportunities, do you have opportunities to fail? I mean, is the pressure greater? Does it change your practice?
Well, I mean, I think that, it would be nice if one could be allowed to fail in public. But I think, that when you get to a certain stage, there's too much involved. You've got galleries and collectors and museums and reputations and blah, blah. So it just becomes a whole uncontrollable thing.
And more collaborative, bigger projects, more people involved, more of a director role, or?
Yeah, I do my photo shoots and the kind of film things that I do. Those always have a lot of people involved. I love to work in a group. I'm not the sort of artist who wants to be in their garret and not speak to anyone for 5 years. I don't really enjoy that. I like balance. I like the fact that I have this studio that's kind of very busy. Projects happen downstairs. I can be a part of real life things, and then I can retreat into my own space to do my painting. And then if I'm doing a film, I can have a lot of people. We can do, So I like a mixture. So it's a very kind of I think my practice is a kind of a social one, because there are costumiers and photographers and all that. So it's very much a kind of a social practice.
There also seems in your work that there's overtly political work, like the Scramble for Africa or Black Gold 1 and 2, and then there's work that's much more it swings in the other direction, about being completely oblivious to the to the consequences of one's actions. Right, a lot of the people in Mr. and Mrs. Anders with their heads chopped off are sort of oblivious to the what their leisure and abundance is costing. Are you aware of those two different moments, or is it really the same, a more political kind of work, or a more subtle commentary?
I mean, I think, every gesture is political, even when you leave the house, what you wear is political. You make decisions about what's your body image, what's your self-image, and all those things. So, in a sense, I don't think there is such a thing as an outside of what's political. Everything is. What you choose not to do is political. Do you know what I mean? As well as what you choose to do. So, for me, it's a whole. They're connected. I mean, even when I'm doing kind of abstract paintings, supposedly abstract paintings, but they're not entirely just about abstraction. They're about pattern, they're about taste, they're about history, they're about the relationship of what I'm doing to what went before. So I don't think it's possible to make a work that's just, But what I don't do is I do not want to make art that's almost like a pamphlet or a document. I always prefer to problematize whatever is being done. There are different layers of complexity, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So it's not just the message. There are other things happening. There are things happening formally as well in the work. That's very important to me. Yeah. Mm.
I mean, in that sense, I think what I think is such a brilliant continuity in the work is the Dutch wax fabric, that you can recognize it and there's something sort of unexpected going on. When I first saw your work, I thought it was a play on the word colored. You want colored, I'll give you colored. I'll give you multicolored. And it works in 3 dimensions. It works in painting. It's a really rather wonderful kind of marker of where you're inserting yourself in history and on. So I'm wondering if you would be able to tell me for you the Dutch wax fabric, how it sort of what is its continuity for you in your work? Why do you?
Well, I mean, first of all, for those who don't know this, and I'm sure there might be some people who are just bored of hearing this, but I have to say it again. And just give a sense of the origins of the fabric. The fabrics are Indonesian-influenced fabrics produced by the Dutch at first for sales to the Indonesian market. And then the Indonesians wanted to protect their own market, so they tried West Africa. And the fabrics became really popular because after the period of independence in Africa, mostly late 50s and the 60s, people wanted to have non-Western clothes. But then, ironically, of course, the colored, the Dutch wax were taken on. And there are places where they're now made in Africa as well. But originally, they're kind of Dutch fabrics, Dutch mimicking Indonesian. But I like all those things because, whenever people fix identities, what people forget is that actually, I mean, even British culture, does have bits of French and all kinds of things in it. It's never kind of pure.
Like language.
Yeah, exactly. And so in a way, when I was asked to seek out authenticity, the fabric was a symbol of the refusal of the notion of authenticity for me. So that's kind of how I kind of started using the fabrics.
Mm. But also very seductive and quite sort of...
Yes, of course, because then I could do a Josephine Baker banana dance with the fabrics.
Right. Looking forward to that. Perhaps we might, at this point, open up questions for Yinka that if anyone might have in the audience. Someone over here.
Hi. Thanks. I was wondering how you'd characterize your relationship between you and your collectors or buyers, your end users, I guess. So not people going to the Tate, but people that directly buy your work, and how that has evolved.
Well, I mean, I'll be frank with you. I don't have any kind of relationship with collectors. I mean, because I don't think it's something that I'm actually qualified to do, to be honest. I mean, I work with 3 galleries, Stephen Friedman Gallery in London, James Cohen Gallery in New York, and Anna Schwartz in Sydney. And they know how to talk to collectors. I don't do that.
That's their job.
Yeah. Yes.
What has been the response to your work from Nigerian viewing public?
Well, I've been in the news. I know that I've been in the newspapers in Nigeria, and I feel a sense of huge support. Really, I mean, I've had people writing to me saying, well done, thank you for what you're doing, and so I know that there is a lot of support there, and that there is talk that I may be able to do something in Nigeria fairly soon. So. So I do feel the support that's coming from there. Yeah.
Hi, Yinka.
Hello.
Connie Jackson. I was interested, when I saw Odile and Odette, I actually nearly cried thinking about when I was a little girl in our ballet class in Chicago, went to try out for the Nutcracker, thinking that it was the late 60s and it ought to be time for some black kids to be in the Nutcracker. And we're told that the auditions were held already, although we could see the other classes showing up to audition. And they just sort of pushed us out and said, keep moving. So it was interesting to see it and to kind of think about that whole idea of not being able to see your beauty mirrored back in the culture. And I that really came to me. But it was interesting because in all your figures, you tend to use a more European body type versus a more African body type. And I was just wondering, as you were thinking about representation, again, what is black art, what is black, what is white? But it was something that's always struck me, and seeing so many of the figures at one time really was struck by it.
Yeah. Well, I think the moment you present any kind of image, we live in a kind of a sort of racial world. In relation to Odile and Odette, I actually went to the Royal Opera House because I wanted to do that project for a festival or something. Anyway, and I wanted to have a black ballerina and a white ballerina. Well, the Royal Opera House told me, well, they don't have a black ballerina. And, but they were also, I've built up a really good relationship with them, and I'm going to hopefully be doing more stuff with them. But, so they had to then find, they had to find a freelance black ballerina. And then the white ballerina they had working with them already. But they like that project because they've actually screened this on Trafalgar Square twice now. And I don't know if that changed anything in the company at the Opera House, but I did that project, and I used their studios and everything. But actually, what the piece is actually saying, in a way, my experience is an expression of what the piece is saying. I don't know if that makes any sense, but the fact that I couldn't, there were fixed kind of types who could dance with the Royal Ballet, So I don't know why that. But also I wanted to actually question, because, the opera Swan Lake, is this white ballerina and the white swan and the black swan. And the black swan is the baddie, and the white swan is the good one. But I wanted to create this thing where you can't actually tell, who is who, because they're actually one and the same. And in the ballet, it's danced by one person, So in a way, that's what I was trying to do with that piece. But equally, I also, I really hear you, because when I showed this piece in Brooklyn, in America, You know, I know that African Americans tend to be really touched by this piece. You know, and in fact, when I showed this piece in Washington, there was actually a ballet group that did a tribute. They did a live performance as a tribute to that piece. You know, and that was a very interesting thing. Yeah.
But I just want to point out how often in your work there is very specific types of movement and also weightlessness. You know, there's the astronauts floating, there's the ballerina who's sort of on tippy toes, and there's, you know, the gal on the swing and the floating shoe. I mean, that seems to be something that interests you, that kind of, you know, sort of denying the body almost, even though they're so prevalent.
Well, I guess art is a way to create alchemy. And alchemy, you know, defying gravity, is kind of trying to create something that is hyper-real or beyond the real. Mm. You know, as artists, I guess we're kind of dreamers in that sense. Mm. Yeah.
I would like to know something more about the boat in the bottle, because
yes. Mm-hmm.
I really like that work, and also because there is a tradition of putting boats in a bottle that is very
yes.
special, and I don't know how you made it. Probably it's so different. I don't know, and I think there are also other problems with the heat, and I don't know, and it's beautiful. It doesn't break. It's there, and well, I would like to know about that.
Well, you can't know about that. I mean, that's
some mysteries we'll keep.
I mean, magic. You can't reveal magic. You know what I mean? Magic is, you know. I mean, as a child, you probably saw some magic tricks. I mean, did the magician ever tell you what he did? No. So I'm not saying, I'm afraid.
What took you from being an unrecognised artist to a recognised and well-respected artist? What pieces of work did that for you? What connections?
I always felt recognised. There was never a time when I thought of myself as unrecognised. No, but on a more kind of serious note, I think the first public exhibition I was part of, was because I had my graduation at Goldsmiths. And so from the Goldsmiths MA, there was something called Barclay's Young Artist Award that was at the Serpentine. And so I started big. So my first public exhibition was at the Serpentine. and then I got £5,000, I think, for that. I couldn't believe how much money that was. Wow, £5,000, you know, I kind of. So I really enjoyed showing at the Serpentine. So that was like my first sort of public thing. But that was straight from Goldsmiths, because I was a student, you know, when I graduated. So that was my graduation show at the Serpentine. So I would say that was probably the first thing, yeah.
One more question.
Yeah.
Well, what are you trying to influence through your art?
What am I trying to influence? Well, I mean, in a way, I think I'm trying to show that that artists, there are all kinds of artists in the world. You know, it's not all white male middle class. You know, there are people like me too, and just to show that, you know, our art should sort of reflect the society that we are, and if by being visible somehow I've managed to do that, I'd be very happy, just to show that, you know, we're all shades and different colors, and our culture should reflect that. So, you know, I hope I managed to do that.
Well, there's always been something that I'm curious about. It's an issue to do with horror.
It's to do with?
Horror.
Horror?
Yes.
Okay.
Within the work you produce. In particularly to do with the uncanny and the way that you use mirrors a lot and doubling. And all of these things link directly to horror and alongside, of course, already been spoken about decapitation and the like. So I'm just quite interested where you see and what kind of horror you're trying to represent.
Well, I mean, I think I would describe what you're talking about as gallows humor. I think that if you've been historically, I mean, I personally haven't been oppressed because I won't allow that, but if historically you're perceived as being oppressed, then you have to laugh about it. You have to, you know, of course if I were to actually chop a real person's head off, I'll be in jail, you know, so I couldn't really do that. But you know, in art, you can do that, so you can poke fun, and you can, you know, and there's a dark side to this humor, you know. So it's a form of humor, it's a form of parody. But of course, you know, you laugh first, and then you realize, actually, maybe this isn't so funny, actually, you know, in the context of history. You know, so, and I think that kind of approach to art is something that satire is done for a long time. You know, if you take the work of Hogarth or, you know, other kind of artists like that I do like. So I don't know if that answers some of that question, but yeah.
I would agree with the gentleman. There is a lot of horror and Gothic, and using the Dorian Gray and doubles and headlessness, so therefore monstrosity. I think there's.
Yeah, but the world is monstrous.
It would use them quite alongside very pleasurable and exuberant images.
Yeah, I mean, there's a kind of, you know, there's a dark side to things as well, you know, as you well know, especially, you know, historically, and unfortunately, it's still going on. So that's just human nature. Yeah.
Hi, Yinka. We've seen a lot of you in your work in Dorian Gray and Dandy, and I wondered, where have you gone in your work, and will we see you again in your work?
Joe, don't do this to me. Well, maybe at some point in the future, maybe, you know, but it's been great to just, in the early part of my practice, I used myself a lot in my work, but it's been good to actually take a bit of a distance and direct things without actually putting myself in. And that's also been good to do that. I think I probably did it in the early part of my career out of desperation. Because and it's cheaper as well. Now, I'm not suggesting here that I'm cheap.
Hi. This is of particular interest to me because I'm an artist from the Caribbean and working abroad. And I've been here for a year, and before that I was in New York for 5 years. And you start to feel like an immigrant artist, because when you say home here or in the States, people think you mean the Caribbean. But then when you're in the Caribbean, because you've spent so much time away from what you consider your home, people think you mean the States or the UK. And so you start to feel almost homeless. And I'm reading this book now. It's by Edwidge Danticat. She's a Haitian writer. It's called Create Dangerously, and she talks about writing as an immigrant artist. And she starts to speak about the work that the artist produced as a home. So the art as home. Instead of writing from an origin or towards an origin, the work itself is the origin. And that's what I think about when I look at your work. It sort of inhabits its own space. It's not from something or to something. It just is a space where the viewer can temporarily visit and live. So I sort of wanted to know what your relationship to home and place and your art is coming from a place or not coming from a place is.
Yeah, no, I mean, well said, actually. I mean, I like the way you put that very much. You know, I mean, quite, because I actually think that, you know, if you're an immigrant and you've come from somewhere else, there's a sense of not belonging in the place you're at. But actually, there's also equally a sense of not being able to take that backward step anymore because you already left. So you don't actually, you're outdated in terms of where you come from because you left. And your memory is basically based on when you left. So actually you're disconnected from the past. But you're not connected to the present in the way that the indigenous people in that present space are. So you're in this kind of for want of a better term, a sort of in-between space. And I think actually I had a lot of restlessness about this for many years, until the point at which I realized that actually my home is this condition of the in-between. And that's when I found peace, in that in-between, in the solace of the in-between. So actually the way you put that is quite apt, and it's something that I think is possibly shared by a lot of immigrants.
Somewhat connected, if I could ask a question. Your work's been seen in so many contexts, from African art museums, the Tate, fashion ideas, the YBAs. Is there a context that you don't like your work to be seen in? Or, yeah.
Have you seen that film by Woody Allen called Zelig?
All right, yes. You are all things for all people.
Well, I wouldn't put it that way, but there's a sense of the Zelig, about the work, in the way that it has this kind of chameleon-type things in terms of context.
Right.
And so when I first saw that film, that's kind of, I very much identified with that Zelig character.
Interesting. Yeah. It succeeds.
Yeah.
Hi. It sort of follows on from what you're just saying, actually. Do you find it surreal that secondary school children and possibly primary school children learn about your work? And, because at my school we use your work as a big basis for our work. So is that, given how our education used to be in secondary and primary schools, do you find it surreal or... No?
It's the first time I know that. I don't know.
Oh, really?
Well, thanks for using my work.
As the first black British artist on the fourth plinth, which is quite shocking, I know that some of us feel that you've actually colluded with the imperial narrative of Trafalgar Square, and that you could have used the opportunity to disrupt that, and you sort of celebrate multiculturalism and Nelson's legacy. But do you feel, well, you've just said you don't want the burden of that, but do you feel there's something in that?
Well, I haven't done any of those. I haven't done anything specific because actually, I feel in the comments that I've heard, the two sides equally take something from my work. So in other words, you described it as a celebration of multiculturalism, but is it? Did you say that on the front? That's what I said. I'm an artist.
My question
you
follows...
think about the gaps in between, okay? Don't just go by what I said.
My question follows on from that, and it's about your identity as a black artist, and I wonder whether you ever feel a sense that this identity is a burden. I was interested to hear you say that you have nothing to be angry about, and I understand completely where you're coming from, but I wonder whether others are surprised and you feel that others have expectations of you that you don't wish to fulfill. And I might note also that you did early on use the word fury. You said something about, I can't remember exactly what it was, but you did use the word fury. So I was a little surprised when you really said that you feel that there is nothing to be angry about.
Okay. Well, put it this way, right? I'm having a ball, right? I'm showing all over the world. I'm being given money for what I love doing. What's there to be angry about? I want to say, on a more serious note, I have things to say, and I think about a lot of the kind of political things, right? And I've been given a platform to express myself, because at the end of the day, that's what art is. You show in museums, you show in galleries. You could be gagged. Fortunately, I'm not in a country, because in some countries, you'll be thrown straight into jail for expressing yourself. Even in Nigeria, where Nigeria had military rule for quite a long time, and a lot of Nigerian artists, people like Wole Soyinka, Fela Kuti, were thrown into jail, And I managed to get myself to a place where I could express myself and I could speak more freely and do it in my own way. I don't take that lightly, you know. I really appreciate that. So I think that as a result of my appreciation of this, because some people here don't actually realize the importance of freedom of expression, and they, you know, they don't take advantage of that. You know. Whereas for me, this is a very, very important and precious thing to be able to show in museums and speak about my work freely. So I don't have anything to be angry about. You know, I have a platform on which I can, you know, express myself.
But do people not expect you to represent something bigger than just you?
Well, you know, all you can ever be is you. I have no pretensions to representing anyone. I do not speak for anybody else because I cannot. It is impossible. I can speak for my own subjectivity because all I know and am aware of is my own subjectivity. So my expression comes out of my own subjectivity, and that's the most that I can do. I cannot express myself beyond my own subject.
How long does it normally take for you to get like your initial idea and then put it into a gallery? Like how long is the process of making one of your like exhibition things?
I'm just trying to figure out where you are so I can look at you, and I can't.
I'm over here.
Okay, you're there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shall I ask it again?
Yeah. So how long does it take from idea to production? Is that what the question is?
Do you like immediately do it, or do you think about it for a while first and like?
Well, I think most of this stuff anyway happens when I'm in the shower. You know, so it depends on, and then no, I mean, you know, because I have a lot of shows kind of scheduled anyway, and you know, art fairs, various museum exhibitions, and so on. So usually, and for most of them, I have to do proposals. So that basically, you know, I mean, there's a boring administrative, practical side to this. You know, you write a proposal, and then you research the cost of everything, and then you give. So as you have the ideas, you think, oh, okay, you know, I've got 2 shows coming up. I've got, you know, 5 ideas. Which one am I going to use for those shows? You know, but this is evolving because actually, as a result of doing one exhibition, for example, the 4th Plinth, a number of ideas have actually come out of that project. So projects, in a sense, create new projects. You know, it's kind of organic in that way.
Yeah. All right, I think there are no other questions. Well, if I could just thank Yinka very much. That was wonderful.
I won't keep you long. My name's Victoria Walsh. I'm head of adult programmes here at Tate Britain, and I just want to, on behalf of Penelope Curtis, who unfortunately had to leave, and on behalf of Tate Britain and I'm sure BP, I would just like to express our thanks to both Yinka and Gilda. Listening, I did give me a few moments to just reflect, and it does seem to me, as we've moved from the big conversation of New Labour to the big society of Coalition Britain and a new emphasis on heritage, Yinka remains one of the most important British artists who can speak to this particular moment. Beyond the aesthetics of victimhood that Yinka spoke about, Yinka's embrace of an aesthetic of ambivalence remains a challenge to history, obviously the politics of representation, and I think more than anything the status of difference that the institutions and the practice of art have contributed to over the centuries, and which, as I'm sure you are all aware, Tate Britain continues and strives to negotiate through its collection and certainly its future new displays. So in short, Yinka, thank you very much for such an enjoyable conversation, the bigger, better conversation, and certainly to Gilda for bringing out this conversation for us all to enjoy tonight. The lightness of touch, the complexity of the thinking is evident to us all. And I am sure BP would join in thinking that this has also been one of the most pertinent BP British Art lectures we could have had. So on behalf of us all, thank you very much. There's no gallows humour in there from me, I'm afraid. But there is the invitation to join us all for a drink now. And thank you, BP, also for the sponsoring of this lecture. Thank you.